Alright, so 2023's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is available in some theaters right now for early screenings, but it comes out next week. This will be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't watched the film yet, you are safe. The film is directed by John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, who directed 2018's Game Night. The screenplay is by them as well as Michael Gilio, and the story is by Michael Gilio and Chris McKay. In the film, we follow a charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers who embark on an epic quest to retrieve a lost relic. Along the way, they have to deal with some pretty dangerous stuff, including but not limited to dragons, eccentric politicians, and dark magic. Starring in the film, we have Chris Pine as Edgin. His character basically describes himself as the guy who comes up with plans and plays the loop. We also have Michelle Rodriguez as Holga, who is basically the muscle of the group, I guess you could say. Next up is Justice Smith as Simon. His character is on his way to becoming a powerful wizard. He gets some really cool moments with magic, and honestly, he gets a lot to do in this film. He's a pretty integral part. Regé-Jean Page plays Zenk. His character seems the most capable out of all of them, the one that probably shouldn't be there. Also in the film, we have Sophia Lillis as Doric. I forget exactly what the term of her character is, but essentially she's a shapeshifter. Then we have Hugh Grant as Forge, the eccentric politician I was talking about before, and Daisy Head as pretty much the main villain of the film, Sophina. To start this review off officially, I have not played D&D. I'm not a D&D fan. I don't know much about it, so this review is purely about the movie and not about the fandom of Dungeons & Dragons as a whole. That being said, watching the trailers for this film leading up to it, I didn't think this movie was going to be good whatsoever. Then I started hearing early reviews saying this movie was actually really good, but even hearing that praise early on wasn't enough to really get me excited for the film. After watching the film, did I get more than I expected? Yes, I did. Not to say it's a perfect film because it definitely isn't, but I got a lot more than I was expecting, not just with the humor, but also the drama and the action. Sometimes a film like this can have trouble balancing tones, but I think this one does a pretty good job with it. The fight choreography is really fun. Michelle Rodriguez especially has some great fight choreography, but it's when they get into the stuff that has bigger scale where the visual effects really are apparent. There's a lot of scenes throughout this movie where the visual effects do not look great, but it never completely takes me out of the film. Just a few scenes that I'm a little nitpicky on. There's one thing in particular they do with the visual effects that was really weird.
That was weird.
It wasn't necessarily bad weird, but it was just weird. If you've seen the film, you probably know which scene I'm talking about. It involves Chris Pine playing the lute. Which leads me into the humor of the movie. The humor by far is the main focus of the film. The main focus was to have fun with it, not to have this super serious, dramatic, fantasy type movie. All the actors work really well with each other. I think they all have good chemistry. Lots of lines of dialogue in there that had not only the audience, but me as well laughing out loud. So yeah, overall the comedy really does work in this movie. The action for the most part does work in this movie. I think it's held back a little bit by the visual effects, but for the most part, it's nothing that bothers me that much. I also think there's some really fun cinematography in this film. Overall, a lot to like about this movie, but I do have some negatives to get into. I already mentioned that the visual effects don't look the greatest. That's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things for me, at least. I think the biggest deal for me is the story. The story wasn't the most original story I've ever seen. Not that it's a bad story, but again, I feel like I've seen this story done in other movies and TV shows. I do think this film sets itself apart from other films and TV shows with the actors, the humor, the world building. But on the surface, the story isn't anything to be amazed by. Another complaint that I have is that the film really doesn't need to be 2 hours long, or at least almost 2 hours long. It's 2 hours and 14 minutes with credits. I think the pacing is a little bit off in this movie. By the time you get to the climax of the film, it feels a little underwhelming compared to scenes we've had before, which kind of leads me to my last complaint, which is the villain, or villains, I should say. I think the villains are pretty underwhelming in this film. Definitely nothing to write home about. They play the role they're supposed to play, but they're not unlike any other villain we've seen before. Daisy Head as Sophina, not the greatest villain. No shade towards the actress whatsoever. The only reason Hugh Grant as Forge works is because he's Hugh Grant. Last thing I'll say before I rank this movie is these types of movies typically aren't for me. I'm not the biggest fan of Lord of the Rings or Hobbit. A couple years ago, I tried watching some different medieval fantasy type movies. Really couldn't get into them, so maybe this just isn't the genre for me. That being said, I still had fun with this film, but it's nothing I'm going to be revisiting anytime soon. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and rank this film. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves from 2023 is a discounted ticket. Overall, like I said, I got a lot more than I was expecting. I don't think many people were looking forward to this film, but if you were, I think you're gonna have a good time. Sure, it's not a perfect film, but if this is the type of film for you, I highly recommend going to the theater to check it out. But have you seen 2023's Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves? Tell me down in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you in the middle? Have you not seen it? Are you planning on watching it anytime soon? Why or why not? Comment that down below as well. Really, any comments you have for me, I'd very much love to hear from you. I respond to as much as I can. But do me a favor and leave a like on this video, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and I will see you in the next one.